The Sahel's sun blazed mercilessly over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the presidential compound where Malik Ouedraogo stood at attention. Sweat beaded on his forehead beneath his military beret, but he didn't move. For 7 years, he had been President Ibrahim Traoré's most trusted bodyguard, a man who had sworn an oath written in blood and sealed with honor. Today, that oath would be tested in ways he never imagined. They had threatened his wife first. The voice on the phone was calm, methodical, speaking French with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Captain Ouedraogo," the voice had said, "we have something that belongs to you." Then came the sound that would haunt his dreams, Layla's muffled scream, desperate and terrified, before the line went dead. The second call came 12 hours later, his 6-year-old son Jamal crying for his father in the background, while strange voices spoke in languages Malik didn't recognize. The boy's sobs cut through him like shrapnel, each whimper a fresh wound in his soul. The third call was his mother, 73 years old, diabetic, barely able to walk without assistance. They had taken her from her small house on the outskirts of the city, where she grew tomatoes and peppers in clay pots and prayed 5 times a day for her son's safety. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Malik," she had said, "don't let them break you." But they were breaking him, systematically, methodically, professionally. Now, as he stood in his cramped barracks room staring at the black velvet case they had delivered, Malik felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on his chest. Inside the case lay a syringe filled with clear liquid, odorless, tasteless, and lethal within minutes. All he had to do was inject it into President Traoré's tea during their morning briefing. A heart attack, they said. Clean, simple, untraceable. The gun trembled in his hand as he pressed it to his temple. For a moment, death seemed easier than betrayal. But then he thought of Layla's eyes, of Jamal's laugh, of his mother's weathered hands teaching him to pray as a child. They were still alive somewhere in this sprawling city, and as long as they breathed, he had to keep fighting. Malik lowered the weapon and sank to his knees on the concrete floor. The weight of his decision crushed down on him like the heel of a giant boot. He was trapped between 2 unthinkable choices: betray the man he had sworn to protect, or let his family die. President Ibrahim Traoré was not like the leaders who had come before. At 35, he was young for a head of state, but his eyes carried the weight of generations. He had risen to power not through connections or wealth, but through the simple revolutionary act of telling the truth. When the former government had sold mining rights to foreign corporations for pennies on the dollar while citizens starved, Traoré had spoken out. When French military bases operated on Burkina soil as if it were still a colony, he had demanded their withdrawal. When international aid came with strings that bound the country's hands, he had cut those strings with a machete. The West called him a dictator, a threat to regional stability. His own people called him hope. Malik had been there the night Traoré first addressed the nation as its new leader. "We will no longer be the children begging at the master's table," Traoré had said, his voice carrying across radio waves to every corner of the country. "We will build our own table, and we will decide who sits with us." Those words had stirred something in Malik's chest, a pride he hadn't felt since his father died fighting for independence decades earlier. This was why he had joined Traoré's protection detail, why he had sworn his oath, why he had trained his body and mind to take a bullet for this man without hesitation. Now, as Malik walked through the compound toward the presidential residence, that oath felt like a noose around his neck. The morning briefing took place in Traoré's private office, a simple room with concrete walls and a desk made from local wood. No gold fixtures, no imported marble, no portraits of himself, just maps of Burkina Faso and photographs of citizens whose lives had improved under his leadership. children in new schools, farmers with modern equipment, women running businesses with microloans from the National Development Bank. "You look tired, my friend," Traoré said as Malik entered. The president was reviewing intelligence reports, his brow furrowed with concentration. "Rough night?" Malik nodded, not trusting his voice. The syringe felt like molten metal against his ribs. "Sit," Traoré said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Share some tea with me. It's from the hills near Banfora, good for clearing the mind." On the tray between them sat 2 cups, one already filled with steaming amber liquid, the other empty and waiting. This was the moment. This was the plan. Malik's hand moved toward his jacket pocket where the syringe waited. But something made him stop. Traoré was looking at him with genuine concern, the way a father might look at a troubled son. "Malik, what's wrong? You've been like a brother. To me these past 7 years, I can see when something is eating at you." The words hit Malik like physical blows. Brother. 7 years of shared meals, late-night strategy sessions, moments of laughter between the weight of governing a nation struggling to find its feet. This man had never treated him as merely an employee or a shield. He had been invited to family dinners, had his advice sought on matters of state, had been trusted with secrets that could topple governments. "Mr. President," Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever regret the choices you've made? Taking power, challenging the West, putting yourself in danger?" Traoré leaned back in his chair, studying Malik's face. "Regret?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I fear sometimes. Yes. I fear for my family, for my people, for you and the others who risk everything to stand with me. But regret? No." His voice grew stronger. "You cannot build a free country while begging for permission to stand. Even if it costs you everything, you must stand." The words pierced through the fog of terror and desperation that had clouded Malik's judgment for days. Here was a man willing to die for his principles, and Malik was being asked to kill him to save his own family. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth. "Excuse me, sir," Malik said, standing abruptly. "I need a moment." He walked quickly from the office, down the hallway, past confused guards who had never seen their captain move with such urgency. In the nearest bathroom, he locked the door and pulled out the syringe with shaking hands. For a moment, he stared at the clear liquid that was meant to end a life and a dream. Then, with a roar of anguish that seemed to tear from the depths of his soul, he smashed the syringe against the tile wall. Glass shattered, poison spilled across the floor, and with it went his last chance to save his family through betrayal. His phone buzzed immediately. A text message from an unknown number. "You failed. They die tonight." Malik stared at the screen, tears burning his eyes. He had made his choice, but at what cost? Then another message appeared, this one from a number he hadn't seen in 3 years. Léon. His heart stopped. Léon Cabore was a ghost, a man who had walked away from military intelligence after one too many operations that left him questioning who the real enemy was. If anyone could track the untraceable, find the unfindable, it was him. But Léon worked for no government, answered to no flag. He operated by one simple rule. Family was sacred. Malik quickly typed back, "Need extraction. 3 targets, clock is ticking." The response came within seconds. "Location? Unknown. Industrial sounds in background, metal doors, somewhere in the Port District." On it. Léon Cabore had spent 15 years learning how to disappear, how to become a shadow that moved between worlds without casting a reflection. After his discharge from military intelligence, officially for insubordination, unofficially for refusing to torture a village elder suspected of harboring rebels, he had vanished into the gray spaces between legal and illegal, moral and expedient. He operated from a network of safe houses scattered across West Africa, funded by jobs that governments couldn't officially authorize but desperately needed done. Hostage extractions, intelligence gathering, the occasional elimination of targets too dangerous to capture. He was expensive, efficient, and completely amoral about everything except one thing. Innocent families were off limits. When Malik's message came through, Leon was in a hotel room in Bamako, cleaning a sniper rifle and listening to Al Jazeera. Report on rising tensions in Burkina Faso. The mention of Malik's name made him pause. They had served together in the border campaigns against jihadist infiltrators, had bled together, saved each other's lives more than once. If Malik was calling in favors, the situation was desperate. Within 20 minutes, Leon was airborne in a small aircraft he kept registered under the name of a fictitious mining company. The flight to Ouagadougou took 2 hours, giving him time to hack into the city's telecommunications grid and begin triangulating the source of the calls to Malik's phone. The trail led to the port district, as Malik had suspected. Ouagadougou was landlocked, but the old colonial term stuck to describe the industrial area where shipping containers arrived by truck from Abidjan and Lomé. It was a maze of warehouses, freight yards, and abandoned buildings, perfect for holding prisoners without attracting attention. Leon's equipment was sophisticated but portable: signal analyzers, thermal imaging scanners, micro-drones equipped with cameras and audio sensors. He worked methodically, mapping the district, identifying potential holding sites, cross-referencing with recent utility usage and security camera footage. The breakthrough came when he detected the unique acoustic signature Malik had described. The hum of industrial machinery combined with the echo patterns of a large enclosed space with metal walls. The signature matched a warehouse complex on the southern edge of the district, partially abandoned but with recent electrical activity in one section. He sent Malik the coordinates along with thermal imaging showing 3 heat signatures in a shipping container plus 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. Malik's response was immediate. "Moving now." "Negative," Leon replied. "You're compromised. They have watchers on you. I'll handle extraction. You focus on the bigger picture." But Malik was already moving, driven by a father's desperation and a husband's love. He commandeered a delivery van, using his security credentials to override the driver's protests, and raced toward the coordinates Leon had provided. The warehouse district at night was a labyrinth of shadows and rusted metal. Malik crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching the 2 guards patrol the perimeter of the red container marked 2B. They moved with military precision. Former soldiers turned mercenaries, weapons held with casual familiarity. Inside that container were the 3 people who made his life worth living. His wife, Layla, whose laughter could chase away the darkness of the worst days. His son, Jamal, who drew pictures of his father as a superhero and believed it completely. His mother, Adja, who had raised him alone after his father died in the independence. Wars, teaching him that honor was worth more than gold. The first guard never saw him coming. Malik had learned stealth in the northern campaigns, where a careless footstep could alert jihadist sentries and doom an entire patrol. He wrapped the chain around the man's neck and pulled with everything he had, feeling the guard's struggles weaken until his body went limp. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's body hitting the ground, but Malik was faster. A single shot to the chest dropped him before he could raise an alarm. The sound echoed through the empty district like a thunderclap, but no one came running. This part of the city minded its own business. The container door creaked open with a sound like a dying animal. Inside, darkness thick enough to taste, and then his eyes adjusted, and he saw them. Layla looked up at him with a mixture of relief and terror. Her face was bruised, her clothes torn, but her eyes still held the fire that had made him fall in love with her 12 years earlier. Jamal was curled against his mother's side, trying to be brave the way his father had taught him. Aja lay in the corner, breathing shallow but steady, her lips moving in silent prayer. Malik dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, pulling them all into his arms. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the war, not the conspiracy, not the men who had used his family as weapons against his soul. Just the feel of their bodies against his, alive and warm and real. "I knew you'd come," Layla whispered against his ear. "But there's something you need to know." They talked about a second team, backup assassins at the presidential compound. "If you didn't follow through, they have another plan." Malik's blood turned to ice water. He had broken their syringe, but they had prepared for that possibility. President Traoré was still in danger. "We need to move," he said, cutting their bonds with a knife taken from the first guard's belt. "All of us, right now." As they stumbled toward the container's entrance, Layla caught his arm. "Malik, don't go back, please. You've saved us. Isn't that enough?" He looked into her eyes, seeing his own reflection there along with 13 years of marriage, of shared dreams and quiet moments, and the kind of love that only grows stronger under pressure. "If he dies," Malik said quietly, "everything we've built dies with him. This country, our future, Jamal's future. It all disappears. I can't let that happen." Layla closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. She had married a soldier, and soldiers sometimes had to choose between personal happiness and duty. She understood, even if it broke her heart. Leon met them at the extraction point, an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of the district. He appeared out of the darkness like smoke given form, dressed in civilian clothes, but moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His eyes swept the family quickly, assessing injuries, calculating risks. "Medical attention can wait," he said to Malik. "Your intelligence was right. There's a kill team moving toward the compound. 3 vehicles, professional operators, probably ex-special forces." "How long do we have?" Malik asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." Malik helped his family into Leon's armored SUV, kissing Jamal's forehead and squeezing his mother's hand. To Layla, he said simply, "I'll come back." "You better," she replied. And in those 2 words was everything they couldn't say in the time they had left. Leon drove with controlled aggression through streets that seemed too quiet for a city of 2 million people. "This isn't just about assassination anymore," he said as they wove through traffic. "I intercepted communications before jamming their network. They're planning to stage a coup, make it look like political instability requires international intervention." "Who's behind it?" "Western intelligence, but not officially. Private contractors funded through shell companies. The kind of operation that doesn't exist on paper but has unlimited resources. They reached the compound's outer perimeter just as 3 black SUVs were approaching from the east. Malik counted at least 8 operators, all armed with automatic weapons and moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. "Can you get me inside?" Malik asked. "I can get you close. The rest is up to you." Leon's vehicle had been modified, with armor plating and electronic countermeasures. He drove straight toward the compound's rear entrance while Malik readied his weapons, a sidearm, a combat knife, and the desperate fury of a man protecting everything he held sacred. The guards. At the gate, recognized Malik and waved him through without question. He sprinted across the courtyard, past fountains and gardens that seemed bizarrely peaceful, given the violence about to unfold. Behind him, he could hear the SUVs entering the compound's main entrance, their occupants already dispersing to predetermined positions. President Traoré was in his private study, reviewing agricultural reports by lamplight. He looked up as Malik burst through the door, taking in his captain's disheveled appearance and wild eyes. "Sir, we need to move. Now. Assassination. Team on the compound." Traoré didn't question, didn't hesitate. He had survived 3 previous coup attempts by trusting his instincts and the men who stood with him. Where? Safe room, basement level. I'll hold them off. But as they moved toward the door, it exploded, inward in a shower of wood and plaster. The first assassin through the breach was already raising his weapon when Malik tackled him, driving both men to the floor in a tangle of limbs and violence. The assassin was good, professional, trained, experienced. But Malik was fighting for more than money or ideology. He was fighting for the idea that a small African nation could chart its own course, that people could choose their own leaders, that families could sleep safely in their beds without foreign powers manipulating their lives like chess pieces. The fight was brief and brutal. Malik's knife found the assassin's throat just as backup arrived. Not more killers, but President Traoré's personal guard, alerted by the explosion and responding with overwhelming force. When the smoke cleared, 5 attackers were dead and 3 captured. The coup attempt had failed, but Malik knew this was only the beginning. The masterminds behind the operation would not give up so easily. In a secure conference room beneath the presidential palace, intelligence officers spread out files and photographs like tarot cards revealing a dark future. The captured assassins had been professionals, but they were also expendable. Their equipment bore no identifying marks. Their papers were perfect forgeries, their training evident, but their true employers carefully obscured. Colonel Mori Diallo, head of internal security, pointed to a series of financial transactions tracked through offshore accounts. The funding comes from at least 6 different shell companies, all registered in tax havens, all connected to defense contractors with ties to Western intelligence services. President Traoré studied the documents with the focused intensity that had made him a formidable leader. "This isn't just about removing me," he said finally. "This is about demonstrating that any African leader who challenges the established order can be eliminated with impunity." Malik sat at the table, still wearing the clothes he had fought in, blood under his fingernails from the violence that had saved his president's life. "There's something else," he said. "The man who coordinated my family's kidnapping mentioned a name, Lyndon. No first name, no nationality, but someone with enough authority to approve an operation of this scope." Colonel Diallo's expression changed. He reached into a locked file cabinet and withdrew a folder marked with security classifications Malik had never seen before. "Marcus Lyndon," Diallo said, opening the file to reveal surveillance photographs of a man in his 50s with gray hair and cold eyes. Former CIA, officially retired 10 years ago. Unofficially, he coordinates regime change operations across Africa through a network of private military companies and intelligence contractors. The photographs showed Lyndon in various African capitals over the past decade, usually during periods of political upheaval. Somalia during the Civil War, Mali before the French intervention, Chad during the disputed elections. "He's a coordinator," Traoré said, studying the images. "Someone who connects the money to the muscle, who provides plausible deniability to governments that want results without responsibility." "And now he's here," Malik said, "in our country, trying to destroy everything we've built." President Traoré was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that all carried terrible risks. Finally, he turned to Malik with the expression of a man who had made a decision that would define his legacy. "Find him," he said simply. "End this." Marcus Lyndon lived in the shadows by choice, but even shadows leave traces for those who know how to look. Leon's network included former intelligence officers, disillusioned mercenaries, and information brokers who sold secrets to the highest bidder. Within 6 hours of beginning the search, they had a location. The Hotel de la Paix was an upscale establishment favored by foreign businessmen and diplomatic personnel. Its reputation for discretion made it perfect for someone who needed to operate, without attracting attention. Lyndon had registered under the name James Mitchell. claiming to represent an agricultural development firm interested in investing in Burkina Faso's cotton industry. Malik studied the hotel's layout from a van parked across the street. 12 floors, multiple entrances and exits, professional security staff, and guest rooms that could be turned into fortresses with minimal preparation. A direct assault would be suicide. "He's expecting us," Leon said, adjusting the focus on his surveillance scope. "Look at the deployment pattern. 2 men in the lobby who aren't reading their newspapers, 1 on the roof with a radio, at least 3 more we can't see from this angle." "Then we don't give him what he expects," Malik replied. "We go quiet, surgical, in and out before his people know what happened." The hotel's service entrance opened onto an alley used by delivery trucks and maintenance personnel. Malik and Leon entered disguised as telephone repair technicians, carrying equipment cases that contained everything except telephone repair tools. The staff barely glanced at them. Foreign technicians working on communication systems were a common sight in a country still building its infrastructure. Lyndon's room was on the 8th floor, corner suite with commanding views of the city, and multiple escape routes. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the determination of a father protecting his family and a patriot defending his country. The door's electronic lock yielded to Leon's hacking equipment in less than 30 seconds. Inside, the suite was luxuriously appointed with furniture that probably cost more than most Burkina made in a year. French colonial antiques mixed with modern electronics, a physical representation of the old imperialism adapting to new technologies. Marcus Lyndon sat behind a mahogany desk, reviewing documents that appeared to be legitimate agricultural contracts. He looked up as they entered, showing no surprise, no fear, just the calm assessment of a man who had faced death before and expected to face it again. "Captain Wedigo," he said in English, accented with the flat tones of the American Midwest. "I wondered when you would find me." Malik kept his weapon trained on Lyndon's chest, while Leon secured the room, checking for additional threats or hidden weapons. "Why?" Malik asked. "Why my family? Why this country? What did we do to deserve your attention?" Lyndon smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "You didn't do anything. That's the point. This isn't personal. It's business. Your president upset the established order by succeeding. He proved that African nations don't need Western guidance to prosper, and that's a dangerous precedent. So you decided to kill him. I decided to restore stability. Do you have any idea how much money flows through this region every year? Mining rights, military contracts, development aid that gets recycled back to Western companies. We're talking about billions of dollars. Your president threatened that flow by insisting on national sovereignty." Malik's finger tightened on the trigger. "And my family was just collateral damage." "Your family was leverage," Lyndon said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Nothing more, nothing less. I needed you to poison Traoré because you had access and his trust. When you refused to cooperate, I activated the backup plan, simple risk management. The casual dismissal of 3 innocent lives as leverage ignited something primal in Malik's chest. This man had terrorized a 6-year-old child, brutalized an elderly woman, traumatized his wife, all to protect profits and power structures that enriched people who would never set foot in Burkina Faso. "Where are your employers?" Malik demanded. "Who gave the orders?" Lyndon chuckled. "You think there's some shadowy cabal making decisions? This is how the world works, Captain. Governments have interests, corporations have interests, and sometimes those interests align. When they do, people like me make sure the alignment continues. Not anymore." Malik moved closer, pressing the gun barrel against Lyndon's forehead. The older man didn't flinch. "Kill me if you want," Lyndon said. "But this doesn't end with my death. There will always be another operation, another coordinator, another crisis that requires international intervention. You can't stop the tide of history by shooting one man. Maybe not. Malik replied, "but I can stop you." The trial of Marcus Linden became an international sensation, though most Western media portrayed it as a show trial by an authoritarian regime seeking to deflect attention from internal problems. The truth, carefully documented in hours of testimony and thousands of pages of evidence, told a different story. Linden's encrypted communications, recovered from his hotel room, revealed a network spanning dozens of countries and involving billions of dollars in covert funding. The coordination went beyond simple regime change. It was systematic economic warfare designed to keep African nations dependent on Western powers. President Traoré used the trial as a platform to expose the mechanisms of modern imperialism, inviting international journalists and human rights observers to witness the proceedings. The evidence was damning. Contracts for assassinations, payments to militia groups, plans to foment civil unrest that would justify foreign intervention. Malik testified on the third day, describing in detail how Linden's network had kidnapped his family to force his cooperation. His voice remained steady as he recounted finding his loved ones imprisoned in a shipping container, traumatized but alive. The courtroom was silent as he explained his choice to risk their lives rather than betray his oath to protect President Traoré. "This man," Malik said, pointing to Linden in his defendant's chair, "treats human beings as tools to be used and discarded. He terrorized my family, threatened my country, and attempted to murder my president because our independence interfered with his profits. He represents everything that is wrong with a system that values money over human dignity." Linden's defense attorney, flown in from Paris at considerable expense, argued that his client was merely a consultant providing security services to legitimate businesses operating in a dangerous region. The kidnapping of Malik's family, he claimed, was the unauthorized action of overzealous subordinates who had misinterpreted their instructions. The jury, composed of citizens from across Burkina Faso, deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and crimes against the sovereignty of Burkina Faso. Marcus Linden was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the EIC guards led him away, he turned to look directly at Malik. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "There will be others. Then we'll be ready for them," Malik replied. 6 months after the trial, Malik stood on the balcony of his new home overlooking Lake Bam. President Traoré had insisted on providing security and a new residence for Malik's family, recognition that their sacrifice had helped save not just one man's life, but an entire nation's future. The house was modest by international standards, but luxurious for Burkina Faso. 3 bedrooms, running water, electricity, and most importantly, privacy. Jamal had his own room filled with books and toys, including a soccer ball signed by the national team. Aja had a garden where she grew vegetables and flowers, her arthritis improving in the clean air and peaceful surroundings. Layla worked as a nurse at the local health clinic, using skills she had learned during the difficult years when Malik's military salary barely covered their basic needs. She had always been the strong one, the anchor that held their family together during the storms. Now, for the first time in years, she could sleep without fear. But victory came with costs that couldn't be calculated in money or measured in headlines. Malik woke most nights from dreams filled with gunfire and his sons crying. The weight of the choices he had made and the choices he had refused to make pressed down on him like a physical burden. President Traoré visited on a Saturday afternoon, arriving without fanfare in a simple sedan driven by one of his security officers. He found Malik teaching Jamal to fish from the lake's shore, father and son laughing as they struggled with tangled fishing line. "He looks happy," Traoré said, settling onto the wooden bench Malik had built overlooking the water. "He's forgotten." "Most of it," Malik replied. "Children are resilient that way, but sometimes at night, he crawls into our bed and won't let go of my hand." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Jamal splash in the shallows while small fish darted between the reeds. The sun painted everything gold, and for a moment the world felt peaceful. "Any regrets?" Traoré asked. Malik considered the question seriously. He had killed men, some of whom might have had families of their own. He had chosen duty over personal safety, principle over pragmatism, the greater good over individual comfort. About saving my family? Never. About protecting you and this country? Never. He paused. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened. If I had chosen differently, if I had been weaker or more selfish, then Burkina Faso would have a different president, Traoré said simply, one chosen by foreign powers rather than its own people. And your family would still be in danger because men like Lyndon don't honor their promises. A fish jumped in the lake, sending ripples across the surface. Jamal shouted with excitement, pointing at the spreading circles. The international pressure is increasing, Traoré continued. Sanctions, diplomatic isolation, funding cuts for development projects. They want to make an example of us, to show other African leaders what happens when you refuse to kneel. Are you worried? I'm determined. We've proven that sovereignty isn't just a word in speeches. It's a choice you make every day, even when the cost is high. Traoré stood and walked to where Jamal was building a castle from lake mud and sticks. Especially then. 2 years. Later, Malik found himself back in the presidential compound, not as a bodyguard, but as an advisor on national security matters. His experience with Lyndon's network had given him insights into how foreign powers operated in Africa, knowledge that proved invaluable as other nations faced similar pressures. The compound had changed since the assassination attempt. Security was tighter, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of African self-determination. Leaders from across the continent visited regularly, seeking advice on how to resist economic colonialism and political manipulation. Malik's new role involved analyzing threats, coordinating intelligence, sharing with friendly nations, and training security personnel to recognize and counter foreign influence operations. It was challenging work that drew on everything he had learned as a soldier, a bodyguard, and a man who had faced impossible choices. President Traoré's government had not just survived but thrived despite international pressure. New schools opened regularly, funded by domestic resources rather than foreign aid. The National Health Service expanded, providing free medical care to rural communities that had never seen a doctor. Most importantly, young Burkinabe began to believe that their country could compete with anyone on equal terms. Jamal, now 8 years old, attended one of those new schools. His teachers reported that he was bright, curious, and showed particular interest in history and geography. He could locate every African country on a map and tell you which ones had military bases operated by foreign powers. He wants to be a soldier, like his father, Layla told Malik one evening as they watched their son practice martial arts in the backyard. And what do you think about that? I think, Layla said carefully, that every generation has to decide what kind of world they want to live in. If Jamal chooses to defend that world with his life, I'll be proud of him. But I hope he lives in a time when such choices aren't necessary. Malik pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. They had survived something that destroyed other families, emerged stronger rather than broken, found ways to build rather than merely endure. Across the compound, President Traoré worked late into the night, reviewing proposals for a new university that would focus on African languages, history, and culture. The irony wasn't lost on Malik that a man who had been targeted for assassination was now dedicating his life to education and peaceful development. But perhaps that was the point. The best revenge against those who sought to destroy Burkina Faso's independence wasn't violence or retaliation. It was success. Every school built, every business started, Every young person who learned to take pride in their heritage was a victory against the system that Marcus Linden had represented. The knock on Malik's office door came at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday that had been unremarkable until that moment. His secretary announced that he had visitors. Two men claiming to represent an international development organization interested in discussing security arrangements for humanitarian operations. Malik's hand instinctively moved toward the service, weapon he still carried, even in his new role. The timing felt wrong, the approach too formal, the explanation too vague. In his experience, legitimate humanitarian organizations didn't send unannounced delegations to discuss security matters. "Send them in," he said, while simultaneously pressing the silent alarm that would alert President Traoré's security detail. The first man through the door was tall and pale with the bearing of a former military officer. The second was shorter, darker, with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room's layout. Both wore expensive suits that didn't quite conceal the bulges of concealed weapons. "Captain Wedigo," the tall man said in English with a slight accent Malik couldn't place. "Thank you for seeing us without an appointment. I'm David Harrison from the African Development Initiative. This is my colleague, Mr. Santos." Malik remained, seated behind his desk, keeping his hands visible but ready. "I wasn't aware we had any ongoing discussions with your organization." Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're exploring new partnerships in the region. Your reputation as a security expert has reached international circles. We're particularly interested in your unconventional methods for handling foreign threats." The emphasis on foreign threats sent ice through Malik's veins. This was no coincidence. These men knew exactly who he was and what he had done to Marcus Linden's network. "I'm not sure what you mean," Malik said carefully. "My current role focuses on domestic security matters." Santos spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat tones of Eastern Europe. "Come now, Mr. Wedigo. We know about your work with the Linden affair. Quite impressive, really. A simple bodyguard taking down an international intelligence operation." The door opened behind them, and two of President Traoré's security officers entered. Malik felt some tension leave his shoulders, but not much. These visitors had come here for a reason, and he doubted they would be intimidated by a show of force. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Harrison suggested, glancing at the security officers. "What we have to discuss is sensitive. Anything you have to say can be said in front of these men," Malik replied. "They have the appropriate security clearance." Santos reached into his jacket, moving slowly and deliberately. The security officers tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but he withdrew only a manila envelope. "Photographs," Santos said, placing the envelope on Malik's desk. "Taken 3 days ago in Abidjan." Malik's blood turned cold as he opened the envelope. The first photograph showed Layla leaving the health clinic where she worked, unaware that she was being watched. The second showed Jamal at school, playing soccer with his classmates. The third was his mother, Aja, tending her garden. "Your family is quite lovely," Harrison said conversationally. "It would be a shame if anything happened to them." The security officers moved closer, but Malik held up a hand to stop them. He needed to understand what these men wanted before taking action. "You're making a mistake," Malik said, his voice deadly quiet. "The same mistake Marcus Linden made." "Are we?" Santos smiled. "Linden underestimated local resources and overestimated his operational security. We've learned from his failures." Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "The Linden network was just one tentacle of a much larger organism, Captain. You cut it off, but the organism adapted, evolved. We represent that evolution. What do you want? Your cooperation in a simple matter. President Traoré is scheduled to address the African Union next month about South-South cooperation and reducing dependence on Western aid. We'd like him to modify that speech. Tone it down. Focus on partnership rather than independence. Malik almost laughed. After everything they had been through, after the trials and the international pressure and the attempts on Traoré's life, these men thought they could simply walk into his office and make demands. And if he refuses? Santos tapped the photographs. Accidents happen, Captain. Gas leaks, car crashes, medical emergencies. We're much more subtle than our predecessors. The rage that had sustained Malik through his confrontation with Lyndon's network began to build again, but this time it was colder, more focused. These men had made a fundamental error in judgment. They assumed that threatening his family would make him compliant, when in fact it made him exponentially more dangerous. I need time to consider your proposal, Malik said. Harrison nodded. 24 hours. We'll be in touch. He stood, straightening his jacket. Oh, and Captain, don't bother trying to find us. We're not as careless as Marcus Lyndon was. After they left, Malik sat alone in his office, staring at the photographs of his family. The security officers offered to arrest the visitors, but Malik knew it was pointless. These men were professionals who had planned their approach carefully. By now, they were probably on a plane to another country, leaving behind only local assets to carry out their threats. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Leon, the voice answered on the first ring. They're back, Malik said simply. I know. I've been tracking them since they landed in Ouagadougou 3 days ago. Different organization, same goals, better funding. Can you protect my family? Already. Moving. Extraction team will be in position within the hour. But Malik... Leon paused. These people aren't like Lyndon's network. They're patient, well-funded, and they learn from mistakes. This is going to be a long war. Malik looked out his office window at the streets of Ouagadougou, where ordinary citizens went about their daily lives unaware that foreign powers were once again scheming to control their destiny. Then we better win it, he said. The safe house was a nondescript concrete building in an industrial district, chosen for its multiple escape routes and defensible positions. Malik's family had been moved there within 2 hours of Harrison's visit, protected by a team of Leon's most trusted operatives. Layla took the relocation with the weary resignation of a woman who had learned that safety was temporary and peace was earned through constant vigilance. Jamal, now old enough to understand that danger was real, but young enough to see it as an adventure, helped his grandmother settle into their temporary quarters while asking questions about the men with guns who were there to protect them. How long this time? Layla asked as Malik checked the security systems. I don't know, he admitted. These people are different, more patient, better organized. They're playing a longer game. Aja looked up from the book she was reading to Jamal. In my generation, we fought the French directly. Bullets and bombs, clear enemies with clear objectives. This shadow war is harder to understand. But not harder to fight, Malik said. They still want the same thing. Control over our lives, our resources, our future. The methods have changed, but the goal remains the same. President Traoré arrived that evening, traveling in an unmarked vehicle with minimal security. He embraced Malik's family with genuine warmth before settling into the serious business of planning their response. The speech to the African Union isn't negotiable, Traoré said. If we back down now, every aspiring dictator and foreign puppet will know that threats work. We can't set that precedent. Then we need to eliminate the threat, Leon said, spreading intelligence reports across the kitchen table. I've identified at least 12 operatives associated with this network, operating under various covers across West Africa. They call themselves the Stability Group. The name was bitterly ironic. In their worldview, stability meant keeping African nations dependent on foreign aid, foreign military protection, and foreign-controlled economic systems. Any leader who challenged that arrangement was, by definition, destabilizing. Their operational pattern is different from Lyndon's. Network, Leon continued. Instead of direct action, they prefer to create conditions that force their targets to make the choices they want. Economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, manufactured crises that require outside intervention. Malik studied the photographs of Stability Group operatives. Harrison and Santos were there, along with others who looked like former military or intelligence officers from various Western countries. What struck him was how ordinary they appeared, the kind of people who could blend into any international business conference or diplomatic reception. They're already working on multiple fronts, President Traoré said, reviewing classified intelligence reports. Pressure on our international partners to reduce trade, behind-the-scenes lobbying to exclude us from regional development projects, propaganda campaigns portraying our government as authoritarian and unstable. And if that doesn't work? Malik asked. Then they escalate, create a crisis that justifies intervention, stage a terrorist attack, foment ethnic conflict, engineer an economic collapse, whatever it takes to demonstrate that Burkina Faso can't govern itself effectively. Jamal looked up from his coloring book. Papa, are the bad men going to hurt us? Malik knelt beside his son, choosing his words carefully. Some people don't want our country to be free and strong, so they try to scare us into giving up. But we're not going to let them win. Like the story grandmother tells about the hyena and the rabbit? Aja smiled. That's right, little one. The hyena thinks he's stronger, but the rabbit is clever. And sometimes being clever is better than being strong. That night, as his family slept in the safe house, Malik stood guard with Leon's operatives. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden. He had saved his family once, but at what cost? Now they were living in hiding again, prisoners of a conflict they hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. You're thinking, too. Much, Leon said, joining him at the window overlooking the empty street. Maybe, but every time I think we've won, they come back with something new. Harrison was right about one thing. They learn from their mistakes. So do we, Leon pointed out. The difference is that they're fighting for money and control. We're fighting for our families and our freedom. That matters when things get difficult. A vehicle approached down the street. A delivery truck moving too slowly for the early morning hour. Both men tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but the truck passed without stopping. I keep thinking about what Harrison said, Malik continued. About being one tentacle of a larger organism. How many more networks are out there? How many more Marcus Lindens and David Harrisons are we going to have to fight? Leon considered the question seriously. Probably a lot. But here's what they don't understand. Every time they try to break us and fail, we get stronger, more experienced, more connected, more determined. Eventually, the cost of fighting us becomes higher than the benefits of controlling us. And if we're wrong, then our children will continue the fight, and their children after them. Freedom isn't something you win once and keep forever, Malik. It's something you have to earn every day. The Stability Group's campaign unfolded slowly, like a chess match played over months rather than minutes. International aid organizations quietly reduced their presence in Burkina Faso, citing security concerns that materialized in carefully orchestrated reports. Regional partners found reasons to delay or cancel trade agreements. International media began running stories about government corruption and human rights abuses based on evidence that was technically accurate but deliberately taken out of context. President Traoré watched his nation's international reputation deteriorate with the calm determination of a man who had expected this fight. In cabinet meetings, he reminded his ministers that they were experiencing the same systematic isolation that had been used against other African leaders who had challenged the established order. They want us to panic, he said during one particularly difficult session, to make desperate decisions that confirm their narrative about our instability. We won't give them that satisfaction. Instead, Traoré doubled down on domestic development and South-South cooperation. When Western partners withdrew support for infrastructure projects, he negotiated with China and India. When traditional aid sources dried up, he developed programs funded by Burkina Faso's own natural resources. When international isolation threatened to strangle the economy, he strengthened ties with other nations that had faced similar pressure. The strategy worked, but slowly and at considerable cost. The standard of living for ordinary Burkinabe stagnated as resources were redirected toward self-reliance projects. International travel became difficult as Western countries imposed visa restrictions. The brain drain accelerated as young professionals sought opportunities in countries with better international connections. Malik watched these developments from his position as security advisor, increasingly aware that the Stability Group's strategy was more sophisticated than anything Marcus Lyndon's network had attempted. Instead of trying to remove President Traoré through violence, they were systematically undermining the conditions that made his leadership possible. "They're not trying to kill him anymore," Malik observed during a strategy meeting with Leon and other security officials. "They're trying to make his success impossible." "Which is actually more dangerous," Leon replied. "A dead martyr can inspire resistance for generations. A failed leader is quickly forgotten." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the Stability Group's operatives, a financial specialist responsible for coordinating the economic pressure campaign, approached Leon through intermediaries with an offer to defect. Dr. Sarah Chen had been born in Singapore, educated at Oxford, and recruited by the Stability Group because of her expertise in international finance and economic warfare. But 18 months of working to destroy Burkina Faso's economy had worn down her conscience. "I thought I was preventing instability," she explained during a clandestine meeting in a Ouagadougou hotel room. "The briefings made it sound like we were protecting people from chaos and conflict. But I've seen what we're actually doing. Deliberately impoverishing millions of people to maintain Western control over their resources." She provided detailed information about the Stability Group's structure, funding sources, and operational methods. Unlike Marcus Lyndon's network, which had been hierarchical and centralized, the Stability Group operated as a distributed network with cells in multiple countries, making it much harder to disrupt. "The key is the coordination mechanism," Dr. Chen explained, showing encrypted documents on her laptop. "All the cells report to a central command structure based in Geneva, but they don't communicate directly with each other. If you can disrupt the central node, the whole network becomes uncoordinated." Malik studied the organizational charts and financial flows, seeing for the first time the full scope of what they were facing. The Stability Group had an annual budget exceeding that of most African nations, with operatives and assets positioned across multiple continents. "Why are you telling us this?" Malik asked. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Because I have a daughter," she said finally. "She's 10 years old, and she believes the world is fundamentally fair. I want her to be right about that." The information Dr. Chen provided became the foundation for a counter-campaign that took months to plan and years to execute. Rather than trying to fight the Stability Group directly, President Traoré's government worked to expose their methods to international audiences, building coalitions with other targeted nations and gradually shifting the narrative from Burkina Faso's alleged instability to Western efforts to maintain neo-colonial control. The African Union speech that had triggered the current crisis became a defining moment. President Traoré used the platform not just to call for South-South cooperation, but to reveal specific details about foreign manipulation of African politics. He named companies, cited financial transactions, and presented evidence of coordinated efforts to prevent African economic independence. The speech went viral on social media, shared by millions of people who had never heard of Burkina Faso but recognized the broader pattern of how powerful nations controlled weaker ones. International journalists who had ignored or dismissed previous allegations began investigating seriously, uncovering connections between the Stability Group and various Western intelligence services. The Stability Group began to unravel 18 months after Dr. Chen's defection. Investigative journalists in multiple countries published exposés revealing the network's activities, triggering parliamentary inquiries and congressional hearings that forced intelligence agencies to acknowledge and then abandon their proxy operations. David Harrison was arrested in Brussels on charges of fraud and racketeering. Santos disappeared entirely, presumably extracted by his handlers before law enforcement could locate him. Other operatives found themselves unemployed as their cover organizations disbanded or distanced themselves from the scandal. The victory felt different from the triumph over Marcus Linden's network. There had been no dramatic shootouts, no last-minute rescues, no clear moment when good conquered evil. Instead, it had been a slow, grinding campaign of exposure and accountability that had taken years to bear fruit. Malik's family finally moved back to their home overlooking Lake Bam, but they had all been changed by the experience. Jamal, now 12, understood more about international politics than most adults. He spoke confidently about sovereignty and self-determination, concepts that had become part of his daily vocabulary. Layla had started a non-profit organization helping other families who had been displaced by political violence. Aja, despite her advanced age, had become something of a celebrity, giving interviews about her experiences and advocating for the rights of elderly people caught in conflicts they hadn't chosen. President Traoré remained in office, but the years of isolation and pressure had aged him visibly. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the weight of difficult decisions. The international community had begun to normalize relations with Burkina Faso, but the scars of the Stability Group campaign remained. Was it worth it? Malik asked, during one of their regular meetings. Ask me in 20 years, Traoré replied. If we can hand over a truly independent nation to the next generation, then yes. If we fall back into dependence and manipulation, then no. The question haunted Malik as he watched his son grow up in a country that had paid a tremendous price for its freedom. Jamal was smart, curious, and increasingly interested in following his father into government service. But Malik wondered what kind of battles his son would have to fight, what sacrifices the next generation would be asked to make. One evening, as they sat by the lake watching the sun set over water that reflected the sky like polished metal, Jamal asked his father about the future. Will there always be people trying to control us, Papa? Malik considered the question carefully. Probably. Power seeks more power, and freedom requires constant vigilance to maintain. But every generation that stands up for itself makes it a little easier for the next one. Then I want to help, Jamal said with the certainty of youth. When I grow up, I want to protect our country like you did. Malik felt a mixture of pride and sorrow at his son's words. Pride that the boy had learned the value of service and sacrifice. Sorrow that such service would likely be necessary. If you choose that path, Malik said, remember that real strength isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing what's worth fighting for and never giving up on those things, no matter how difficult the battle becomes. Jamal nodded solemnly, and Malik saw in his son's eyes the same determination that had carried him through the darkest moments of his own struggle. The torch was already being passed to the next generation, and Malik could only hope that the world they inherited would be more just than the one they had fought to preserve. As night fell over the lake, father and son sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of past battles and future challenges. The stars emerged one by one, ancient lights that had witnessed countless struggles between freedom and oppression, dignity and subjugation, hope and despair. In the distance, the lights of Ouagadougou twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing a life, a family, a dream that had been preserved through struggle and sacrifice. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't last forever, but for now, it was free. And sometimes, Malik reflected as he put his arm around his son's shoulders, that was enough. 5 years later, Malik stood at the podium of the University of Ouagadougou, addressing a graduating class that included his son Jamal. The young man had chosen to study international relations and African history, preparing himself for a career in diplomacy rather than military service. Freedom, Malik told the graduates, is not a destination you reach and then rest. It's a journey that each generation must undertake for themselves. You will face challenges we cannot imagine, make choices we cannot make for you, and carry responsibilities we can only help you prepare for. In the audience, President Traoré listened with the satisfaction of a man who had seen his life's work, validated by the rising generation. Burkina Faso had not only survived the attempts to control it, but had emerged as a model for other African nations seeking genuine independence. Layla sat beside her husband, watching their son receive his diploma. With tears of pride in her eyes, the scared woman who had been held captive in a shipping container had become a leading advocate for human rights, her experiences giving weight to her testimony at international forums. Aja, now nearly 80, dozed peacefully in her wheelchair, surrounded by the great-grandchildren who would inherit the world her family had helped to shape. After the ceremony, as the families celebrated and students prepared to scatter across the continent and the world, Malik reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The threats hadn't ended. They probably never would. But each victory made the next battle a little more winnable. Each act of courage inspired others to find their own strength. Jamal approached with his diploma in hand and embraced his father. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me that some things are worth any sacrifice." Malik held his son close, feeling the weight of legacy and the lightness of hope in equal measure. The story was far from over, but the next chapter would be written by younger hands, guided by older wisdom, and inspired by the unshakable belief that freedom was worth fighting for. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. Not the defeat of any particular enemy, but the preservation of the idea that people could choose their own destiny. Everything else was just details in the margins of history. The unbreakable guard had become a teacher, the frightened family had become advocates, and the embattled nation had become an example. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference in the world.